few words in English followed by a couple of other languages. I don't know if you've ever watched the movies or read the books of the Hunger Games. It was a popular young adult novel series that took the world by storm. It was very popular a number of years ago, and soon was followed by a series of movies, I think 6 in total. And I have the Blu-ray box, which I ordered in Germany. So it says, Die Tribute von Panem. The Tributes of Panem. And it tells the story, for those of you that are not familiar with the Hunger Games, of a world in the near future that is divided, or it actually tells the story of the United States in the future, that is divided in various districts. One district is where the rulers live, the rich live. Everybody has plenty of food to eat. There is entertainment everywhere. It's a very media-based society where everybody watches movies and watches reality shows. And the most popular reality show is based on a fight between teenagers and other people from the remaining districts. The remaining districts are all dedicated to certain jobs, certain economic functions. And most of these other districts are suppressed. And the people there work to enrich the people in the main district of Panem. And once every couple of years, there is this big game, this televised game, where a few of the representatives, mostly younger people, have to fight young people from the other districts to the death. And only one person can win. And it is every game is televised and watched by the people of the ruling district of Panem. A very cruel society. And the games themselves are meant to instill fear in the districts, because there is a very particular reason that some people end up in the arena. And that is, if you need food, if you are hungry because your district is poor, because you want to feed your children, or children want to feed their parents, they can ask for food. They can submit a request. But the price you have to pay is that you enlist for those Hunger Games, and your name will be in the bowl from which they will ultimately select the candidates for the upcoming Hunger Games. Everything in the story is based on this battle between those who have and the many that have not. And in that respect, it's just like any other science fiction novel. It's a mirror it's an enlarged and exaggerated mirror of the society that we live in, the world in which we live, where a small minority has no hunger, has nothing that they lack, has plenty of entertainment, is able to live a superficial life full of joy and pleasure, whereas the majority of the people on this earth are struggling to make a living, to feed their children, to stay healthy. And especially now in these times where the coronavirus is still expanding all over the world, we see that the countries and the areas that are most at risk are now the poorer countries, the continents that don't have the medical care that we enjoy in our Western world. And it's with fear that I follow the news, because what will happen in Brazil, what will happen in Mexico, what will happen in many countries in Africa once this virus takes hold of the population. I think here in the Netherlands, we think that we're slowly getting out of this situation that we complain about every day, me too. We're so sick and tired of having to stay at home, not being able to meet each other, to not being able to go to church. But what we don't realize is that these, 11, 12 weeks that we've been in this lockdown are still nothing compared to the horror of this virus that is affecting other countries in the world, where maybe there will be millions of people dying, and where it's uncertain if the virus will ever go away. The first reading that we've heard mentions something very peculiar. It reflects upon the time that the people of God spent in the desert following Moses, fleeing Egypt, and following this dream of a new country where they can live in peace, where there is food in surplus, where you don't have to worry about enemies or about your survival, where God will take care of you. And these first stages of the journey kind of resemble our own first weeks during the corona crisis. Yes, everything is different, and we've left the life that we lived behind us, but we're going to be strong. We're going to make sure that we fight, that we conquer this virus. And we were very supportive of one another. Even in the church, we're like, well, yes, it's very different, but we're just going to put some cameras and do live streaming. And, a couple of weeks from now, we can all go back to normal. However, we didn't go back to normal, nor did the people of Israel in the desert. Their journey would take decades. And the longer the journey, the more they started to remember those days in Egypt where, yes, their life wasn't perfect, but at least there was food, at least they could drink, at least they were safe. And they start to complain. I wish we could go back. We wish that we never followed Moses into the desert. Does God still think of us, or has he abandoned us to die here? And those are very understandable reactions. It is very hard for us to adapt to a new situation and not being certain that our previous life and our previous comfort will ever return, that we will be safe again. And it is in those times that both in the time of Moses and the people of God in the desert and also in our days, we start to become anxious and maybe we start to despair. And it is in these times that we start to realize that the things that we took for granted were actually precious. It's one of the elements in the first book of the Hunger Games saga, where even though Katniss Everdeen, who is the main hero of the story, she fondly remembers a day that she was trying to find some food for her sister and her mother, and she comes across a boy who works for the local bakery. And the boy is standing outside, weather is already getting dark, the weather is bad, and he's about to throw away some bread that was burned in the oven. And his father had told him, just throw it away, throw it in the garbage bin. And while he's about to do that, he sees this young girl, Katniss, standing there, hungry. And he decides to give her the bread, even though it was burnt, but at least they could still eat it. And years and years later, when she's competing in the Hunger Games, that same boy becomes her ally. And she will never forget that sign of care, of charity, giving the bread despite the strict orders of his very strict father. And she remembers how good that bread smelled and how good it was to eat it, even though it was burned. Now that she is in that arena and she doesn't even know if she's going to live to see the day, to see her family back, she realizes how precious that loaf of bread was, how precious the little that she had was, now that she misses it. And of course, the bread in the Hunger Games is a metaphor for the love, for the friendship, for the safety, for your ideals and your dreams that you cherish. And once they're taken away, that is when you realize how great their value was and how much you miss them. It is in those times of trial that any comfort is welcome. And in the Hunger Games, the spectators, the people from the rich district, from Panem, they can actually send help to their favorite tribute, their favorite participant. And these gifts descend during the night with a little parachute, and it can contain food or medicine or a device that can help them to win the games maybe. And it's literally help from above. I think the Hunger Games deliberately plays with this idea of prayer, of looking at the heavens and asking for help. And that is exactly what happened in the desert when the people started to realize that they needed God, that they needed his help, that they couldn't survive without him. And it is in these moments where the people start to pray and where Moses prays for them that God comes to their rescue. And in the middle of the night, sends manna from heaven. And in the first reading that Sebastian read in French, it's actually said that God for a while permitted them to get hungry. It's very weird. Why would God let his people go hungry? Well, exactly because he knows that when people are hungry, they realize that they need help. They realize that everything they took for granted in Egypt is actually precious. And once you receive it, like the manna in the morning that they discover so they can make bread to feed their children, what a gift that is, to be able to live, that life itself is a gift from God. And through that gift from the heavens, God lets them feel and experience and taste that he is near the people in need, that he is close to them, that he walks with them, even if this journey still has to go on for years and years and years. He will not abandon his people. Even if they forget him from time to time in the desert, and the story of Moses is plenty of examples of moments where they have lost this idea that God is with them, God never gives up on his promise. And that finally is also the core reason that we celebrate today the feast of Corpus Christi, the feast of the most holy body and blood of Christ. We celebrate the fact that Jesus has told us that he will be with us, and that whoever eats his flesh and drinks his blood, a shocking statement in his days. We see the reaction from the Pharisees and the scribes that are just like bewildered. What is he saying? How can we eat his flesh and drink his blood? Jesus guarantees his listeners and also us that he will be our food and that he will be really present. It is not just a symbol. When we eat his body, when we drink his blood, we will have his life in us. His real presence will be in our hearts. We will carry him in our own body, in our own soul, in our own mind. He will be the food, the gift from heaven. And the Catholic Church has always seen the Eucharist that we celebrate as the fulfillment of that promise. And when we eat the bread and when we drink the consecrated wine, we eat and drink the body and blood of Christ himself, who is present even when we are done with Mass. When we go home or we eat a pizza and we sleep, Jesus will stay among us. That is why we always have this lamp near the tabernacle where we keep the body and blood, where the body of Christ, not the blood. It is a sign that he's always with us in the middle of the night, early in the morning, when we are working, when we're suffering. He will never be anywhere else than near us. And in these times, especially in this year, when most of us cannot come to church and receive the Eucharist, and maybe in some places, some people that can go to Mass or dare to go to Mass, they can now receive communion. But for many Catholics, it is still a dream. It's still something in the future. We are experiencing that same hunger. We realize how important it is, the things that we took for granted, to be able to go to Mass, to be able to come forward and open our hands and open our mouths and receive the body of Christ and have him live inside of us as living tabernacles. It is something that we've often taken for granted. And there's so many that maybe on Sunday morning in the past would wake up and think, am I going to church? Yeah, it's raining. There will be church next week, right? Or I've just gone to church on, at Easter or Christmas. I'll go next year. We've taken it for granted. But now that we can't, that is when we realize how much we are hungry for God's presence in our life. How much we want to receive him in the communion. And how much we miss the family that is always surrounding the altar, surrounding the table where Jesus gives himself as bread and as wine to eat and to drink. You realize how much you love someone when that person is far away from you, when you can't reach that person. My father is in a care home. I've shared this before. He is in the first stages of dementia, and I haven't seen him for months. The reason being, as soon as the lockdown started, all the care centers in the Netherlands were locked up out of fear of contamination and infection. So my father has been inside, not being able to see us, to talk with us for many, many weeks. And just a week ago, we got news that they were finally going to loosen the rules and we could go visit him right in time for Father's Day next week. And so I was initially looking forward to finally see him face to face, because it is not enough to just know that you love him and that you think of him. He wants to see it. You want to experience it. And it's when you can't that you miss it the most. And so this past week, we were making preparations. I was preparing to go and see my father, and then we got word that probably someone in his community had been infected by COVID-19, which meant that the entire care home would go in lockdown again for 2 weeks. I can't tell you how frustrated I was, how sad and even angry. It's like, why can't I go and see him? And just before I went to the church to celebrate this Mass, I got word from my mom that the tests came in and the person who they thought had COVID-19 actually doesn't have it and just has a cold. So it means that the lockdown is lifted. And we hope so, of course. For Father's Day, I can go and see him for real. You realize how much you love someone when you can't be with that person. And once you are reunited, that is when you feel that life. You feel the value of that encounter. That is what I wanted to share with you.